Hello, my dear students, and the rest of the learners. Welcome to part 16 of a 29-part series of tutorials in Fundamentals of Structured Programming using C. In this presentation, we are going to look at what we call the standard functions or subprograms. My name is MemJM, or you can simply call me Emily Swap. What are standard functions? The standard functions are the inbuilt or predefined functions in the translator for C programming language for performing certain tasks. Some categories of inbuilt functions or predefined functions in C are what we classify as the month library functions. Number two, we have what we call the character library functions. And we have number three, what we call the string functions. Let's look at what we call the month library functions. These are the functions that allow the programmer to perform common mathematical calculations. They are predefined in a header file called math.h that you must include in your source code before you use them. This simply means that, my dear students and the rest of the learners, if you know that within your code or within your program, you are going to make use of inbuilt month functions, then it is important that you include the preprocessor directive called math.h in your program so that those functions are meant to be part and parcel of your code. So some examples of such library functions, or what we call the month library functions, or functions that you can use to perform certain mathematical computations or calculations, include square root. If you are going to compute square root using the inbuilt function sqr, whose format is as you can see, then you have to include the preprocessor directive called the month.h. .h simply means month header file. So that's an example. So if, for example, you want to compute the square root of 20, that means that 20 or value 20 has been stored in memory location called x. Then if you write the statement as follows, as sqr, you enclose x into 8, then the result you are going to get will be the square root. An example is sqr 16. It will return 4. This is simply telling you that you can even directly compute or use mathematical function called the square root or sqr to compute a value even without having stored it in memory location. Number two, we have a function like fabs, then we enclose the parameter x. In other words, we are sending value x into 8. So if you send value x into fabs, that function is supposed to return the absolute value of x. For example, you can send value 10.15 into fabs. Another function is ceil. It rounds the value passed into 8, for example, value x, to the smallest integer that is not less than x. For example, if you pass 9.2 into a function called ceil, it will return 10.0. We have a function, inbuilt function like floor. If you pass x, variable x, into a memory location called, or into the function called floor, what it will do is that it will round the value passed into 8 to the largest integer that is not greater than the variable or the value passed into 8. For example, if you pass 9.2 to the function called floor, it will return 9.0. Another function, amongst many, is the function that raises a number to a certain power. For example, if you want to raise 2 to the power 7, then it means that you pass 2, 7 in the function called power, and it will return a value like 128.0. So those are just examples of manned functions. We have other category of functions that we call character library functions. These functions are used to perform useful tests and manipulations of character data and are predefined in a file called ctype.h that you must include in your source code if you are to use any of those character functions. The include or such functions include is lower. So if you pass the content of memory location called x, or if you pass variable x to the function called is lower, it will determine if the argument passed into it is lowercase. The next one is upper. If you pass a value or a character into the function called is upper, if you pass variable x to the function called is upper, it will determine if argument passed into it is uppercase. Another one is alpha. If you pass a character through a variable like x to a function called is alpha, it will determine if argument passed into it is alphabet. Another example of character function is alnum. Now this function, if you pass a value into it, it will determine if the argument passed into it is alphanumeric, and then it will return an only zero value if it is true, or zero if it is false. If you use the function called to lower, if you pass a value or an argument called x to the function called to lower, it will convert a letter sent into it to lowercase. For example, if you write int to lower, then int c, it will return the value. It will return the value, but in lowercase. If you write to upper, it converts a letter to uppercase. Its digit determines if argument passed into it is a decimal digit, and there are others. Now let's look at also what we call the string functions. These functions are used to manipulate strings, for example, by converting strings of digits to integers and floating point values, and are predefined in a header file called stdlib.h that must be included in your source code before you use them. So if you are going to make use of string functions, remember to include the pre-processed directive stdlib.h in your code. Now, some examples of string functions among many that you can use in your program include a toy. So if you pass variable s to the function called a toy, it will convert the string passed into it to an integer. Another function is a tof. If you pass an argument s to the function called a tof, it will convert the string passed into it to a double precision quantity. Another function is tricomp. If you pass two strings, string 1 and string 2, in the function called tricomp, this function will compare the two strings lexicographically. It will compare the two strings lexicographically. Another function is called strcompile. Strcompile, written as strcmpi. If you pass two strings into it, for example, string 1 and string 2, this function will compare the two strings without regard to the case. Another function is at all. At all. At all. If you pass a string into it, if you pass a variable into it, for example, variable s, it will convert the string received to a long integer. Another function is strcpy. Strcpy, written as strcpy. If you pass two strings into this function, for example, string 1 and string 2, it will copy string 2 to string 1. Another function is starlen. Starlen, written as strlen. If you pass an argument, for example, argument s, to the function called starlen, it will return the number of characters in that string. In addition, if you have to use functions to manipulate strings or array of characters, you must include the header file string.h that has definitions of the string manipulating functions, such as the ones we have looked at, like starlen, stricat, strrev, stricump, amongst others. So the following is a sample program implementing standard functions for manipulating array of char, or what we call string data structure. This program prompts for users' names separately, then joins them into one name and tabulates the total number of characters in it. So we have the comment there. We have the pre-processed directive std there. And because we're going to make use of functions of type string, then we have to include the string header file as a pre-processed directive. Then we have the main function there, and then we are declaring memory locations for handling strings of characters or array of char. And these variables are full name, whose content on data should not exceed 30 characters. The second one is the variable called name, whose number of characters should not exceed 8. The third one is second name, whose content should not exceed 8 characters. The last one there is first name, whose content should not exceed 8 characters. And these 4 memory locations are for array of char, and therefore the data type is character. We also have another function, or we also have another variable of type char, array of char, which is last, and it is of size, it should not exceed 70 characters. And then from there, we are declaring another memory location called message, which is supposed to hold content of array of char. And we are initializing it with the following set of characters, or what we call string little. Welcome to string data structures. So this is the statement that will be assigned or stored in the memory location called message. As you can see, we have not enclosed any value in the square brackets, for message. Why? Because the compiler will just count the number of characters in the string little, and that is what will determine the size of message. The next statement to be displayed on the screen is, what is your first name? The user will key in or type his or her first name, for example, Julius. The set of characters Julius will be picked and will be assigned in the memory location called first name. The next statement to be displayed now on the screen is the one which will say it will pick, the processor will pick the content in memory location called message, which is welcome to string data structures, and display it on the screen, and also pick the content in memory location called first name and display it on the screen. And therefore, when this statement is executed, it will read as follows. So if, for example, the content in memory location called first name is Julius, then this statement will read as follows, or this is what will be displayed on the screen. Welcome to string data structures, Julius. Welcome to string data structures, Julius. Then the next statement is telling the compiler to copy the content in the memory location called first name to the content of the memory location called full name. So the first section, so then this statement will be displayed on the screen, which will read as follows. The first section of your full name is made of the name, so it will pick now the current content of full name. It will pick the current content of full name. And that is the content which will be displayed on the screen at this point. Therefore, the statement will read as, the first section of your full name is made of the name, so it will display. Then the next statement to be displayed will be, enter the second or enter the first 3 characters in your second name. So you type the 3 characters of your second name. Those 3 characters will be picked and stored in the memory location called second name. The next statement to be displayed on the screen will be, enter the remaining characters in your second name. So if you want, for example, enter the first 3 characters For example, if the name is Meme, the first three characters for me to type will be M, double E. So the other ME will be left. So when I'm entering this or keying in my remaining characters, I'll type EME. So you type the last characters of your second name, those last characters will be picked, or the remaining characters will be picked, and they'll be stored in memory location called last. From there, this statement is telling the compiler, it is telling the compiler, or it is performing the work of streetcard, this function. So it is telling the compiler what? It is telling the compiler to pick the content in the memory location called last and the content of the memory called second name. Join the two. Join the two. Join the first three characters and the remaining characters. Join them together. So when this statement is executed, that your second name is, the content memory location called second name will simply be the full name. It will be a full name, a second full name. And then the next statement is to pick the content of second name. Pick the content of second name and join it with the content of the memory location called full name. So when the statement is displayed, what is your that name? And you enter your that name. The content of your that name or your that name will be picked, and those characters will be stored in memory location called that name. So when the statement is displayed, your that name is, it will display the content in memory location called that name as entered. And then this statement here is now combining the that name to the content or the value or the characters in the memory location called that name, the content of the memory location called full name. It is joining them together. So when you execute or when the compiler will execute this statement, therefore your full name is first name, comma, second name, comma, third name. This will simply display the three names. The three names. What you have as your first name, what is in your second name, and what is in your third name, memory locations. So when this statement is executed, that the name is composed of characters including spaces. Now, this function, this last bit, is simply computing the total. It is going to tabulate the total number of characters, the total number of characters in the memory location called full name. And those are the number of characters that will be displayed on the screen. So if the number of characters in your name are, for example, 20, this statement will read as follows. This name is composed of 20 characters, including spaces. Very important. And then this statement will tell the compiler to take the control back to the operating system and end the program. Now, my dear students and the rest of the learners, let us code this program. Let us code this program in Falcon IDE so that we can see how it will behave. So what we expect to do or should do is simply to launch Falcon IDE, and code this program as it is. So to launch our Falcon IDE, we are going to click on search and then we type Falcon. Then once its icon is displayed, you click on it and wait for it to launch. Then click on File, point on New, and click on Project. And a new project, click Empty Project and click Next. And the project name, give it a name. So I'll call it string inbuilt. Or let me begin with the word inbuilt. Let me call it inbuilt. functions. And then the compiler type is C, and I'll click on finish. Now, once the name of our project has been provided, you right click on it, point on new, and now click on the save file. Then rename your project or your file. So give it the same name. So I'll call it inbuilt functions. And then you click anywhere outside there. You can see the name of our program is, the name of our file is inbuilt functions.c. Note, there is no space in between inbuilt functions. And then you code your program in this editor. So let's have our program that we are going to discuss transferred into our IDE editor section. So let's have our program here. Remember, you can always type your program that we have discussed directly in the Falcon IDE editor section. Or if you have coded it or you have typed it in a Word processor, like Microsoft Word, Notepad, or Wordpad, you can just copy it and paste it in your Falcon IDE. So this is the program that we are going to discuss. So you save your program by clicking on File, then Save. And then, because you are saving the project, of course, together with the program, give your project a name, and then you click on Save. But as we have seen in the previous presentations in this series, it's always good to click on File and then Save All, so that it saves everything. The program you have written, the project, and any other files that will be generated by your compiler during the processing period. From there, you compile your program. So, and compiling, remember, it is telling the processor. It is telling the processor to convert your program to object code. Now, there are certain messages that have been displayed at the bottom here. And if you point on them, or you double click or you click on it, it will highlight some text. We are being told that the format expects type char, but argument 2 as type char size 8. Now, this is because of the variations in the sizes declared and the current content which is there. Now, these values for the content here, you can see it is saying that it expects type char, but argument 2 as type char size 8. So this statement should not worry you. What is important here is that our compilation is successful at the bottom. The rest will be handled as you continue entering the data or when you execute the program. So let's execute this program and see what will happen. You can see that your program or our program is executing. We are being asked, what is your first name? So like my first name, I can type Julius and press enter. You can see it is displaying the statement as I've explained. Welcome to Spring Data Structures, Julius. Now, the first section of your full name is made of the name Julius, which is true. Now, enter the first 3 characters in your second name. So my second name is, for example, Meme. So I can type M-E-E and press enter. Then it is requesting me to enter the remaining characters in my second name. So I can enter or type the remaining. When I press enter, you can see, just as I have said, that from the function string, the one which I've already explained, for combining the two, you can see that our characters have been combined together. Our characters or my characters have been combined together. And it has displayed the message, your second name is Meme. So even though I've entered the first three characters separately and the remaining separately, with the use of the function that we have well discussed on joining, with the use of those functions that we have well discussed on joining, you can see that triggered this statement here, or this function triggered, has been able to join them, and it is displaying it as a single name, as you can see. That's why it has said that your second name is Meme. Now it's asking me for that name. What is your that name? Let me type, for example, Lingera, or let me type Emily Swap. Emily Swap. Then I press enter. You can see it is saying, what is your that name? Emily Swap. Your that name is Emily Swap. Therefore, your full name is Julius P. Emily Swap. Now, my dear students and the rest of the learners, are you not wondering? I'm very sure you are wondering, how comes that Meme, the name Meme has disappeared? It is simply because of the size of the full name, the memory location I've set for my full name. If you look at this program, the full name has been given a size, maximum size of 30. So if the full name exceeds 30, you expect it to misbehave in a way. Why? Because the characters have exceeded. Let me press enter, and then we type something different and see, shorter name. What will happen? So if I run it, and then I'm asked, what is your first name? I type Julius. Then second name, I type M-E-E. Then the remaining characters, M-E. And then when it asks me what is your right name, if I type John, and then I press enter, you can see that that one is failing. This name is composed of 17 characters, including spaces. So your full name is Julius John. So if, for example, you are asked about that name, let me press enter again so that you can see. If you asked for that name and you have specified that that name should not exceed 8 characters, if those characters exceed, you may get an error or you get an output which is not correct. So let me run again, my dear students and the rest of the learners, so that you can have a look. What is your first name? Julius. What is your second name? Or the first 3 characters in your second name? Me. And then me. I press enter. What is your third name? Gera. If I press enter, you can see, because my third name is not exceeding the characters and my second name is not exceeding the size I've specified, you can see I'm getting the correct full name. So therefore, your full name is Julius Meme. This name is composed of 18 characters, including spaces. So if you count them, you see that they are 18. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for space, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 for space, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. My dear students and rest of the learners, you can see that our program is correct. The program is giving us correct data. So what we need to pay more attention on is that when you are making use of string, or what we call array of characters, and you're using various functions to maneuver or move around or perform various activities with the text you have entered, ensure that the sizes that you have set aside for the number of characters are accurate. Otherwise, the output you get may not be very accurate. And with that, my dear students and the rest of the learners, we can save our program and our project. And then we click on close all, and then we can exit from our program. And that's how we make use of inbuilt functions. And in this presentation, I paid more attention on how to manipulate string functions or array of char. You can now proceed to part 17 of 29, in which we are going to learn or start learning or commence learning on what we call the user-defined functions or subprograms that you write as a person or as a programmer. Congratulations for learning part 16 of 29 on standard functions or subprograms in fundamentals of structured programming using C. You can access the rest of the parts in the series as well as other computer or ICT videos by clicking or tapping on Emily Swap ICT YouTube channel below this video. To subscribe to the channel, tap on subscribe button below this video in YouTube if it's not currently reading as subscribed. For any further correspondence, kindly write to us through the email emilyswap@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening to me. Let's meet in part 17 of the series, and God bless.